What is going on, everybody? This is Alex, a PhD candidate at NUS Business School in Singapore, and I welcome you to the second episode of the second season of the 4Sight Chats series. In this season of the series, I'm having conversations not only with guests from within the field of futures and foresight, but also with leading scholars and practitioners who have an expertise with other disciplines that are relevant to the investigation of the futures ahead of us. I hope that these conversations will not only inform the field of futures and foresight with fresh new insights, but also that it will encourage more dialogue between futures and foresight and other fields of study. In this episode, I talk with an expert in metamodernism, Brent Cooper. With a Bachelor in International Relations from the University of British Columbia and a Master's of Science in Political Sociology from the London School of Economics, Brent is currently a geopolitical sociologist, an avant-gardian of metamodern thought, and a savage constructive critic of his peers and opponents alike. He founded the Abs-Tract Organization, otherwise known as TATO, to promote abstract thinking, abstractivism, and understanding of abstraction as a social material process. He is also a filmmaker. He created the abstract core philosophy, a sweeping allegory and social experiment about metaphysical fitness. Metamodernism, the topic of my conversation with Brent, is a meta-theory but also a multidisciplinary and cultural movement that reacts to one of the most influential currents of thought of the past century, postmodernism, but it also conciliates what came before postmodern thought, that is, modern thought, with postmodernism itself. For its very nature of attempting to be a conciliatory framework of thought, I cannot stress how crucial yet untapped this framework is as a lens to look at the futures ahead of us. And I hope that this conversation with Brent will make this abundantly clear. In fact, although I don't necessarily agree with everything Brent says, I do agree with Brent that metamodernism is perhaps one of the currents of thought that holds the greatest promise for the betterment of our civilization in our times. In my conversation with Brent, we first talk about an unavoidable issue, what metamodernism is. And here, Brent is very quick to warn us that the emergence of modernism, postmodernism, and metamodernism is not as simple and sequential as it may sound, but rather he notes that metamodernism is an ongoing attempt that emerges from its two predecessors and tries to contextualize them. Then we talk about the normative aspect of metamodernism when we use it to promote certain images of the future, about its differences and similarities with one of the most well-known frameworks of thought in future studies, integral theory, and about its relation with science. Finally, as a more light-hearted closing question, I asked Brent about his film, The Abstract Core Philosophy Act 1, which conveys many of his views on metamodernism in an experimental art form. I truly hope that you will enjoy the conversation. Hi Brent, glad to see you and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I was very impressed by your work and I really wanted to talk more about it with you because I realized that what you're doing with metamodernism is very similar to what I've been doing with futures and forests, and maybe that's the reason why I like it so much. You have been trying to simplify it for the layman on Medium, and I was very impressed by your extensive work on that platform. And I love how you try to relate it to current affairs and to make it not so abstract, a bit more concrete. In fact, once I was introduced to metamodernism, thanks to your writing, I started to read on it, and then I realized so much of it is so abstract and is very difficult to approach, but your writings are very clear and they make it really relatable for like layman people. So I really want to talk to you about this framework, which I also think, as I mentioned to you in private conversations, has a lot of alignments with the study of the futures. So let me ask you a few questions. And again, there is a lot of stuff I want to talk about, but I think the most, perhaps the most basic one, is the question we cannot escape. So we have to start from what is metamodernism. So I'm going to ask you what is metamodernism, but I'm also going to help you with that. So let's just do a bit of a brush up. Insofar as modernism is this belief in the mechanistic reality, and it's a reductionist framework, and it's a belief in never-ending progress, and insofar as postmodernism is a reaction to that and a framework that somehow rejects modernism and shows the limitation of modernism, then my question to you is, what is metamodernism?
Yeah, thanks. And it is a difficult but necessary place to start. And we can make a sort of syllogism only for illustrative purposes, right? That it kind of goes modernism, postmodernism, metamodernism, right? In reality, it's not that simple, because when you ask the question, what is metamodernism, it begs two other questions. What is
Right.
modernism and what is postmodernism? And so those are huge questions, right? Because even modernism, it has been distilled to these sort of frames, and that's salient enough. It's accurate enough, right? But of course, depending on what field we're talking about, the time horizon of modernism shifts. If are we talking about art, philosophy, science? Are we still in modernity? As some scholars argue. So it begs a lot of questions, and those are important, interesting questions, and it applies to postmodernism too. Postmodernism is way more amorphous and fragmented and difficult to study, because it is already a meta discipline, and you come at these things through university, right? You come into contact with them, you work with the tools, but at first it's very alien. Like some of the basic things, like what is Marxism? Who is this guy Marx? Why are we studying this? Because it's all very historically contingent, right? So it's a big mess, right? And you often can look at society and look to the future and think, well, why aren't things as good as they could be, right? Why is there so much suffering and corruption and pollution and whatnot? So as I said, it's not as simple as a syllogism, like one after the other, or even like expanding boxes that contain the former, because there's other terms, right? There's postmodernism, there's post structuralism, and there's about a dozen other kind of postmodern terms. So hypermodernism is an important term that I juxtapose with metamodernism, right? So what is metamodernism, right? We're still not there. And so the starting point is just understanding that it's super complex, it's super humbling, and it's been written about by, a fair set of people now. And in different phases too, so what I call the kind of first phase of metamodernism, the people who were writing about it in the 90s, that got no traction whatsoever. In fact, the research is almost hard to come across. As you noted off camera, like the literatures that we're familiar with, whether it's globalization or futures type stuff, like it's pretty absent of this novel watchword metamodernism, right? And that is unfortunate. It's a missed opportunity, because metamodernism in its various incarnations is trying to speak to a broader, speak of a broader discourse, and speak to a broader turn and a convergence of different disciplines that are all essentially working on the same things. And so, as I was an undergrad student and then a graduate student doing a master's degree, I was taught a lot of postmodernism, and this was between 2006 to 2011. But you're taught these theories because they're still salient, they're still relevant. they're all tentative. Even the professors, as they're teaching you, they're telling you, well, we're teaching you how to think, we're teaching you how to pose questions and form theses, and they don't have the answers to these grand problems, these very, like, whether it's X risk or just kind of spiritual dilemmas. Yeah, where I'm going with this is there's an increasing fragmentation in the tree of knowledge, in the discourses, right? And so, I had a conversation once with a professor. I was like, along the lines of, why aren't we pushing through to sort of meta theory and deeper questions of global transformation? And I was on a track of a lot of interdisciplinarity and then transdisciplinarity, right? So I'm being taught the fragmentation of discourses and the branches and the tree of knowledge being more or less, essential and sacred. But at the same time, I'm trying to look at the whole tree, and he said to me directly, like, the branches on the tree of knowledge kind of, they exist this way for a reason, and we have to respect that. But he wasn't saying it in a naive way, like just buy into this. He was still encouraging me in the direction of trying to transcend it, but I don't think he had the answers. And so the different texts of metamodernism that I've come into contact with, they've not all been fully satisfying, but they've spoken to something sort of subliminal within my own knowledge quest to, try to contextualize the whole and try to make knowledge very agential, and trying to make the careers we're all pursuing more relevant than just making ends meet. Like we want to be a part of a global project to save the planet, more or less. And what we're up against is kind of the status quo of human behavior and the arrangement of human institutions that are largely structured to kind of pay lip service to progress, pay lip service to climate change, instead of actually prioritizing like root causes, solving root causes, or just mass transformation. So metamodernism emerges grappling with some of these questions, looking at a lot of cultural artifacts, a lot of art, a lot of film, photography, looking at various theories of global change in the contemporary age, right? So Fukuyama is referenced in Vermeulen and Vandenacker's work on metamodernism. And so, as I continue to study it, I get a broader and broader view, and I'm still trying to come up with my own synthesis, but it's in one sense, I'm getting closer, but in another sense, it's increasingly out of reach and increasingly irrelevant too. like maybe this project can't hold, but talking to you and others does give me hope that we're not getting hung up on small details, whatever those may be, but our broad work is still attentive to details and kind of what the metadata says and what the aggregate of all of this work adds up to.
Well, it's a work in progress, right? It seems that it is a never-ending process, and perhaps the end of it is not even the objective, at least in what I've read in, and according to what you say, is something that is emerging. It's a meta tentative to conciliate all what has been done before, what knowledge has come before, including the modern and the postmodern. And it's a tentative to conciliate both. So it doesn't have necessarily to arrive at an end point. And it's probably there is no end point. It's just the way itself. Or maybe this is my interpretation of it. But how do you see this element of conciliation? Because okay, it's a complex meta theory, and it's difficult to pinpoint a definition of it. It's elusive, all that, completely agree. But what strikes me as distinctive, I would say, whenever I read some metamodern work, is that there is an element of conciliation, right? And this conciliation comes from the understanding that there's a mix of of feelings to be have about both meta currents of thought. I mean, we have, I guess, meta-modernists have some misgivings, while at the same time some understanding that modernism is okay for some things, and the same goes with postmodernism. So they see the limits and the advantages, the pros and cons of both, and they want to conciliate. So do you think this element of conciliation could be considered as at least one of the most distinctive elements of this meta theory?
Yeah, I'd say so, but I'd qualify it by saying different people frame that in different ways or spin it in different ways. Whether we're talking about like an oscillation, right? And I'm not a huge fan of that term, but it does make sense. And then Hansi and myself kind of are both drawn to a term like superposition to describe kind of the same thing, like sort of an object being in two places at once. And so rather than oscillate back and forth between contradictions or juxtapositions, which is super interesting and a difficult exercise, superposition kind of holds them both in stasis. And just to reference Vermeulen and Vandenacker's work, when I reviewed it, I kind of pulled out kind of 7 historiographical kind of events or themes that they pointed to. And a couple that come to mind are like the financial crisis, right? The war on terror, right? So they're identifying trends, strong trends that are emerging post 2000.
Okay.
And so these were things I was already thinking about in various ways and the interrelation between them. And so they were trying to, take a snapshot of a particular type of consciousness around these events, right? And, at one point they distill a kind of choice or bifurcation between eco-socialism and, neo-fascism, essentially, right?
Oh.
And I think those are the two major poles of contemporary politics, the two major attractors. So, and anything intellectual and academic, I can't separate out from the political and the day-to-day struggle because with the emergence of an idea of a paradigm shift, there's a sense in which we have to not just critique our ways of doing things, but really problematize everything we're doing and understand that it might be still contributing to the problem, to the meta problem.
Sure.
And we all, it's not just about personal failings or blind spots. It's the structural conditions of social life that incentivize a lot of time wasting, a lot of monetizing of different types of activity. And none of it, very little of it goes back to solving the problem, to getting ahead of the problem. And I have little faith in the kind of micro solutions, the personal kind of pull your bootstraps up or whatever. But by the same token, like a meta theory has to bridge micro and macro, which is why I advocate for pretty idealistic things like universal basic income or universal healthcare. Things that the research and the movements behind these things give us faith that those are the directions we should be headed. But so part of the end of history or the return of history, or kind of wrapping up the end of neoliberalism, we collectively as a civilization and as individuals have to kind of work, we have to kind of storyboard it and like live it out. We have to be actors, like playing out the end of the story, because capitalism is just gonna, can sort of destroy the planet. And you have all these dystopian kind of movies or satires like WALL-E from Disney, or Elysium, with the kind of rich people in space kind of thing. Like, as time marches on and we see the wealth gap widening each year, denial is like the most sort of like key factor in all of this, because it becomes such a long road to get to even to study the topics like if you study climate change, just to get where you are, to get where I am, like, had to like grow up, had to overcome a lot of personal hurdles and structural uh, obstacles. And the future, we're trying to usher in a very necessary and realistic future, right? One that's like not just harm reduction and damage control all the time, but like a real pivot in kind of the mainstream ideology. And that's when I read and write about metamodernism, like that's what I'm always clawing at, and trying to pull people into that future.
So this is a nice segue to what I was gonna ask you. You have already covered it a bit. You tend to have a rather political view of this meta theory, unlike other writers, which is something I like, because in some way I also acknowledge that it is an aspect that cannot be decoupled from our ivory tower philosophical contentions. And I also acknowledge that a lot of futures people are very interested in the normative component of the future or futures that we promote. So I think this is an interesting point of alignment with those who study the futures and those who practice 4Sight. So again, you have covered this a bit, but I want to impress you a bit more on what is the normative view of the future that somehow you arrive at promoting. And this, again, I acknowledge that it might not be agreed upon among all metamodernist thinker, but what is at least your view, your reading of it, right? What's your reading of metamodernist as a normative framework to go into the future?
Yeah, I do find a lot of alignment with the Nordic models of metamodernism, where in terms of that, in terms of the normative, we're almost identical. However, there's disagreement on the timeline. So their impressions were that we'd be experiencing sort of neo-fascism for the next 20 years, and we'd have to just buckle up and survive. And so my view evolving throughout 2016 to 2020 was that it was past tense, such a strategic moment for intervention, right, for political success. And none of that really factored into their book, their first one, which came out in 2016. But there was so much good content there, it's hard to disagree with, right? Like they do have a kind of higher synthesis of taking things like liberalism, conservatism, the green sort of party movements, and sort of upgrading it, more prudent than conservatism, that kind of thing. But so my normative, it also comes from reading a lot of social science literature over the past couple decades that's pointing towards a normative turn, right? There's always been a debate about this, and one of the key areas that's been debated that I think is relevant here is public sociology, right? So there's a decade's worth of debates about is this a relevant kind of there's a quadrant model actually for sociology, and public is one of them, along with professional, critical, and I think just academic, basically. But the public is, what think tanks are supposed to do, what media is supposed to do to kind of, and educational institutions, right, to translate that sociological knowledge and frame news in terms of sociology. And you just don't see it much. You don't see many figureheads of it. And, Cornel West is a public philosopher, to an extent, a public sociologist. But there needs to be more, and there's so many pundits out on the internet. Very few of them are conscious of what they're doing in that sense, right? Because they're not like stopping to check if they screw something up. A lot of the bad actors, especially, will just plow through it, and that's a part of their method, is just to not. It doesn't matter if you're right, if you're getting the clicks and whatnot. So we're in this kind of epistemic crisis, post-truth, all these
Mhm.
sorts of things, and not enough people are even interested in those kind of terms and what they mean. So it adds layers to the crisis. And so I'm getting a little bit off your question, which was about the normative. Um, from my perspective, Kate, like I think a lot of us, when we're educated, you go through a kind of a parabola, if you will, with morality. Like at first, you have a kind of childlike view, like there's good and there's evil, right? We watch these movies and it portrays it in black and white, and then you kind of start to understand nuance and gray morality, and you understand that the perspective and the context and uh, zero sum trade-offs and game theory, all these things start to messy and muddle the waters over morality and ethics. So I'm calling it a problem because at some point you have to get over that. you
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
to you have to transcend, and you have to make some choices and have some convictions about what right and wrong is, right?
Paralysis by analysis, right? You're just frozen by complexity.
Or just relativism, right? And you're
Sure.
able to just turn a blind eye to someone else's suffering or criminality or whatever it is. So yes, these things are complex, right? And you
Mm.
necessarily have to kind of go over the parabola. But like at the end of the day, like my politics is just getting simpler and simpler, And I can say that because I've kind of been through a political education. But what I mean is like there's almost nothing to debate. When I come into confrontation with a liberal or conservative, like, and I say like I just want people to have universal healthcare, free healthcare, especially in the United States. I'm always talking about the United States. It's a good global example because it still sets so much global policy. And either they have no idea what I'm talking about, or they want to get into the nitty gritty details of health policy, which is laden with all sorts of assumptions and dogma and different special interests and incentives, distorting the healthcare landscape. At the end of the day, it's economically cheaper and more effective to make it what's called single payer. So at the point of service, healthcare is free. It means the government pays for it, right? And a lot of people think that money comes from tax dollars, and so it's a kind of zero sum thing, and it doesn't come from tax dollars. So there's just a lot of misunderstandings, and that's what gets us into ethical quandaries. It's just misunderstandings built on misunderstandings. So my normative view of the future, it's pretty simple. It's driven, it's evidence based, it's reason based, Enlightenment tradition, but it's also very critical of that, having gone through the postmodern series of turns and reflections and
I got it.
yeah.
So do you think that your view is paralleled by many, or do you think it's also a matter of contention within metamodernism?
I think I think as a community, people who are attracted to metamodernism have a problem of collective articulation and various problems of teamwork. They have different professional obligations that get in the way of that. But broadly speaking, I think what I'm saying is pretty non-controversial.
Okay.
It just depends, like, who's willing to get into it. And also, in the broadest sense, right? Like, this phrase, I contain multitudes, that's
Yeah.
always how I like to think of individuality, because I feel like I've taken in enough historical culture and contemporary culture to feel that is as much a part of me and who I am, right? And so I'm proud to, count myself as part of a long-term global movement, right? So various traditions, like socialism as a tradition, especially in places like America where it's been suppressed.
Hmm.
It's you can't say that it's failed in America because it's still a movement. It's still being attempted, and the critics will often point to other countries and say, "Oh, it failed. It failed there, right? Look at that country." But all of that is just kind of noise. It really undermines the academic context in which we're taught these things in the first place, which is like you don't just throw the word out because it's in the Nazi acronym, like, and idiots like Jordan Peterson who think all lefties have to say is that wasn't real socialism. Like, well, first of all, that's true. And second of all, it's just way more complex. It's way more complex than that, right? So yes, we have to like understand Nazi Germany and how they used socialism, how they hunted down and killed communists and stuff like that, and how it was a sort of totalitarian system that kind of, you could call it socialist if it, didn't discriminate amongst itself, right? If it was an actual, at least nationalist program, if not cosmopolitan, it will work eventually, right? So this question of, well, it hasn't worked or it can't work, it's like, I should have mentioned this at the outset because I was thinking before we hopped on the call, but like capitalism, okay, is one of the top line things that we're going to talk about through metamodernism and understand through that lens, right? If you don't understand capitalism, then you got to go back to those prereq courses. We have to study capitalism, and so much has been written on it, right? It's been done to death. And so it's an important point of departure to understand what capitalism is, what it can and can't be, and what elements of it cannot be allowed to persist. So again, in terms of keeping my politics simple, I like to point to very obvious, big, concrete examples. The military-industrial complex, etc. complex. It touches at least a dozen kind of different sectors. And it's just this capitalistic organizing logic that is predicated on a hell of a lot of fear and paranoia and repression and violence. And so, there's no debate in my world that we have to be shifting away from that. And so I've tried to draw together so many sources outside of what's called metamodernism, right? Because I've sort of had my own agenda for a long time that metamodernism is just one part, but it needs to continually be all integrated with each other and with itself until we're reaching some sort of consilience and some sort of self-evident, reliable truth and consistency in terms of public policy and global cultural shifts.
So you talk about public policy. I'm going to pick up on that, and also about capitalism. And correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm also navigating this. So you clearly understand the limitations of the current system. You mentioned about the disparities, the pronounced disparities that capitalism is bringing about, and yet you also propose some policy solutions. So in my view, right, my reading of your perspective is that you understand there is a system, there is a complex system, which is capitalism, which has some drawbacks, some limitations. But you also, at the same time, don't want to completely reject that system. You are inside it and you want to fix it, right? And this, to me, again, my reading of your perspective. So you later you tell me if I'm right. This, to me, is in opposition with a postmodernist view, because many postmodernist thinkers completely reject capitalism. They are gonna say, no, that system is broken to the point we need to abolish it, right? It has to be stopped. But your view is more like, yes, it has limitation, it has injustices, it's problems, but there are policy decisions that can be made, evidence-based. We still can use evidence, we still can use reason, we still can shun away ideologies to fix it. So is this a correct view of your perspective?
Yeah, I'd say that's mostly correct. And I consider myself more a revolutionary than a reformist. I think that's an important distinction to make. But I think how you framed it is correct. Like we need to get real serious about the specifics about how capitalism is transcended, because you put it well, saying kind of postmodernism is anti-capitalist, and even postmodernism aside, there's a lot of kind of just anti-capitalist kind of rhetoric and fervor, and I completely get it. I completely relate to it, right? And I want to abolish, prisons and a lot of just redundant, deranged institutions that need to be reinvented. But when I say we got to be serious, like it is a kind of tightrope act to not let yourself fall off and just fall down the slippery slopes and into the gutters of theory and praxis, because it's so seductive to be anti-capitalist, like the Occupy movement. And I want it's just part of it is that that's captured, right? It becomes captured, so all of the energy of those people just gets like co-opted or like literally like put in jail.
Mm.
But even if it were the right thing to do to demolish capitalism and transition into a real new coherent system, it's just and I got to be careful here because I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but like human
Right.
nature, there's not a clear path for like sort of how to organize work and society and the distribution of resources without limitation. So like what I just said, those types of sort of excuses are always used by hyper-capitalists and neoliberals to just double down, right? And go, okay, well, communism is dumb and evil. We're gonna just lean into capitalism. But like that has proven very, very harmful, very counterproductive, right? And just again, at least in the minimum terms of wealth inequality widening in the past decade.
Mm.
Like, who would think that not only would the Occupy movement sort of fail and be captured, but that you'd have a kind of mass sentiment that they were right, while you have a mainstream media kind of talking point that they were wrong. And obviously they're right. It's like I think it's pretty universally agreed upon by any economist with a soul that you can have wealth inequality still on a much, much smaller scale.
That's
Right?
Yeah.
Much like, so a CEO could make 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 their employee, not 400 to 1. Right? So it's we're all being kind of gaslit and kind of just like morally like tortured and kind of skewered over these world events that continue to play out over the last decade.
I think a lot of it is also because it's extremely easy to fall into polarized positions. I mean, just picking up on what you said, we don't have to have this huge differences in inequalities, but yet you have not said that we have to abolish inequalities, right? So there is a moderation there. There are boundary conditions and qualifications to that argument, but it's very difficult to get them across, because when you will say we have to reduce inequalities, most of the people who hear, they will probably say, oh, so you are saying that we should be equal. So they fall into extremist position because it's easier. It's very much more difficult to see the nuances of these issues. So at this point, I personally think that, well, I think that it is abundantly clear that a metamodernist point of view could be of use, of avail to the study of the futures. But I also want to ask you something that would probably make it even clearer. So when we study the futures, oftentimes we create possible scenarios. And scenarios are presented in a narrative form. And they are narrative because they have to be in some way relatable, visceral, and memorable to the audience so that they can evaluate it. And it's good to have a range of scenarios because the future is not predetermined. It's not just going to be one. So it's open to options. So by having a range of scenarios, we have this concurrent evaluations of potential futures, right? So recently, in the past few decades, there has been a surge in creating scenarios by paying a lot of attention to integral theory, which is this idea that there are 4 quadrants of realities, some of which are not necessarily only about the collective or the external environment. There are also some of these 4 quadrants are more about the interior character and perceptions of the external environment. So, according to integral theory and the use of integral theory in the study of the futures, well, it's very simple. When we do scenarios, we just make sure to look at all of those quadrants, right? So we don't just describe scenarios of how things look objectively, but we try to uncover the subjective perception of that objectivity. So scenarios in that manner are more layered, more granular, more complex. They take into account that complexity. So I noticed that metamodernism is somehow aligned, in some ways aligned to integral theory. In some ways, it transcends integral theory. And you have also written about this, which I guess is another point of alignment between metamodernism and the study of the futures, because we are really talking a very similar language here. So what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is that which metamodernism brings to the table, which is above and beyond integral theory?
Yeah. First, before I forget, I wanted to say just a related point. The papers you sent me, the one about the four scenarios of the future, like I really like your writing and the just the rigor in the research and the unfolding of the argument.
Was that on the
I
future of capitalism?
yeah, I
Okay.
think so. And I don't know if it was the same paper, but the one about the psychological attachment to capitalism.
That is
I
that one, yeah.
think, I think,
That's good.
yeah, that's it was a great paper, and of course, I'm drawn to the transformation scenario. I think
Yeah,
that's what we should be leaning into, and it's
great.
beautifully written, but it's also like it's something that has to be explained to people, and I think when it's explained correctly, they'll get it and they'll want to be a part of it, right? It's got some selling features. Otherwise it's not going to happen, right? And it is an inclusive project. So if the sort of movement and the infrastructure is there, then it's not just flowery language. It can be an actual program for people. And so that's my hope for it in that sense. And yeah, I just wanted to
Thanks.
nod to that paper and those points, because we just went over capitalism, and that psychological attachment to it is so important, because so many
Right.
people have that, and there's a lot to tease out there, and as you say, there's not much literature on the topic. I think there might be some if we really dig, but it definitely needs to be grappled with in a programmatic way. As I said, the importance of understanding capitalism, and then kind of as you're putting forward, like the importance of decoupling yourself psychologically from it, so you're not dependent on it, and that's dependent on material resources as well. So yeah, so but to shift back to integral, um where do I begin? The four quadrant model, I haven't, as you know, I kind of did a little paper on it myself, kind of putting abstraction into the four quadrants. If I think it's very useful baseline for some things, but just like we wouldn't have come across metamodernism in our academic studies, like I never really came across integral through any of my courses, right? I never was introduced to that. And, maybe that's a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing, but I am familiar with integral from being a kid in the 90s, and kind of just and starting to get on the internet and paying attention to it a little bit. But as I've said in my writings and elsewhere, I never got drawn and sucked into the movement part of it, which eventually kind of collapsed and is still pushed forward in various ways. So I guess my short answer to that question, though, is like, for me, metamodernism doesn't start with the integral model of the four quadrants. Like, that's not my introduction to it. I do think it's a useful point of connection, because like Michael Brooks has talked about it in a couple of his videos. And Hansi has his own kind of version of the four quadrants in terms of development, and other people have played with those models and kind of made different, multi-dimensional models. And so at the end of the day, as they say, the map is not the territory. So I suppose metamodernism, offers some of that, but what it offers beyond is a kind of, as Vermeulen and Van den Acker call it, a structure of feeling. That's a very complicated, loaded term, but really, I guess it just means like an intuition, and kind of coupled with your cultural milieu, and a kind of academic development, so that again, you can only really even grapple with the word in itself once you've kind of learned about modern theory and history, postmodernism, all these things. So it's definitely an ongoing project, right? But it's an ongoing project that is hopefully getting somewhere, and getting somewhere relatively quickly. Whereas modernism and postmodernism, we know now that those aren't going anywhere if we were just to trust them wholly as organizing, a set of organizing principles. We know what modernism leads to. Leads to nukes and totalitarianism and space race, and dicks in space is in the news right now, because of the last couple of weeks, these billionaires going into space. And that's modernism, right? And we know postmodernism has diminishing returns because it's super abstract. It's super, self-referential. It's very nuanced, and it's designed to develop the mind through different coursework and tools and heuristics and fields. And so I've rarely thought of postmodernism in any kind of limited sense, right? We're kind of compelled to do so, to do meta theory, to go beyond it, but you always have to go back into it, and just realize how ignorant we all are, of the depth of research there, in both like what is explicitly called postmodern and what is just randomly out there in the last 70 years, right? In terms of film, fiction, theory. Yeah. So yeah, again, metamodernism is this kind of pull towards a lot of higher principles and synthesis.
Yeah, let me pull the strings here, because I think there are a lot of things that can pick the attention of people who look at the futures. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that it is so fascinating that if integral theory has made inroads, quite a few inroads actually. I've sent you a few papers. Remember Slaughter and all the papers written after him. They looked at how to apply integral theory to study the futures. Yet, on the other hand, metamodernism, which seems to have provided several frameworks above and beyond integral theory, has not made inroads. So that by itself is extremely fascinating, to see that there is certainly potential, untapped potential. And also to pull the strings on the capitalism argument, the funny thing, as I mentioned to you, the funny thing is that when I reread my article about capitalism, about the 4 futures of capitalism, that at this point, I think it has been written 4 years ago, and I noticed that back that time, I looked at how to conciliate this attachment to capitalism, which is nothing else but modernism, and understanding, I had this metaphor in mind. The attachment, the psychological attachment we have for capitalism is like a child. We need to understand his or her needs, right? But yet, on the other hand, we understand all the shortcomings of capitalism. So we have to conciliate both, right? So when I reread the article with the metamodern literature in mind, I was literally surprised that in some ways my writing could be ascribed to a metamodernist meta theory, right? So I think not only we have space to think about metamodernist futures, let's just put it like that, because integral theory is a good example, but maybe a lot of stuff that has been written about the futures already within the futures and 4Sight literature, which is growing quite fast, can also already be ascribed to a metamodernist view. So that is, again, another evidence for us to think that there is space to hybridize between these two perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. And I've always been interested in kind of what is called systems theory and complexity and macro history, and
Mm.
so exactly like the things in
Oh
your
wow.
paper too, right? And absolutely, I'd categorize it as what I call implicit metamodernism, right? So my attraction to metamodernism is recognizing that there's a quite big field of literature that deserves to be grouped in a certain way, because
Mm.
it can help actualize the turning point in the future that we want, right? So you are situating yourself on this kind of horizon of possibility that not all, very little scholarship does. And metamodernism does theorize historicity in a new way, and
Mm.
that's a tricky word. It's taken me a long time to kind of figure out the different things that it means. But the simplest way to say it is kind of like it reframes how you look at time itself, and history, and past, present, and future all can kind of blend into one. And also, like, there's a sort of renewal of historicity, and also of a kind of new periodization, as Vermeulen and Vandenacker put it, but more accurately, I think, is historiography. So in the 21st century, right, we have computers and the internet, like a new type of research is possible that wasn't possible before that. And so we can see deeply into the past and sort of project into the future in much more accurate ways. And so, yeah, it enables what, you know, kind of a very necessary, relevant, salient paradigm shift beyond postmodernism, beyond the 20th century. And through doing the work that we do and having these conversations, like we're trying to put the pieces together into something. That's my view, right? A kind of map or machine that, comes alive and gets to work. And while that's happening, while we're doing that, technology is also accelerating, and there's new thresholds of automation being met, and there's the idea of a technological singularity. So I've looked at some of that literature too. One estimate pinpoints artificial general intelligence in about 2029. So that's like just around the corner, but it's pretty plausible in my view. So we're doing something against the clock too, right? And speaking of the clock, like the atomic bulletin of atomic scientists clock, right? What is it like? We're like 2 seconds away from annihilation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, futures and 4Sight absolutely collide with metamodernism and my work and your work. But we also want to like handle and kind of steer clear of the techno optimists, right?
Right.
Because they're the ones that just think everything's going to be fine, and that we don't really have any agency in one way or another.
Well, you tap into a huge issue in my field, because you talk to anyone in 4Sight and they will complain to you that the vast majority of collective projections about the future tend to be techno optimists, which is the extreme version of modernism. So this is quite sad, given that we have several other possibilities. Just by a simple scenario exercise, you will have 4 or 5 scenarios, right? So just the techno optimist scenario is just one, right? So you tap into a huge issues of it's a very inflammatory to talk about this within our community. So I want to ask you about another aspect that is equally inflammatory, since we are on that note. As you know, I have dabbled with epistemologies in the past few months. I have written an article that criticized the unscientificity of the study of the futures, got some responses, wrote a commentary. This everything was done with my good mentor, Thomas Chermak. And this caused quite a stir in the field of futures and 4Sight. So I got interested in what is science and what is the different
Hmm.
views you have of science, right? I literally stumbled upon it. Before, I wasn't really interested in it, but I stumbled upon the problem. So I also got interested in the way modernism looks at science and the way postmodernism looks at science. And I realized that, all right, the modernist look of science is a very reductionist, mechanistic view, which is empiricist in nature. So whatever you see, that's what it is, right? The epistemology and the ontology are collapsed. I also realized that postmodernists collapse epistemology and ontology because they believe that everything is what you perceive, and what you perceive affects reality. So social constructions actually affect reality out there. So they conflate ontology and epistemology. So I saw the limitations, to make it short, I saw the limitations of the views of science, both in terms of modernism and postmodernism. And that is why I tried to promote a critical realist view of science, which is in and of itself a philosophy of science that conciliates modernism and postmodernism. So it's funny because I have read a paper that ascribes critical realism to metamodernism. So again, somehow I stumbled upon metamodernism. Then I want to ask you confirmation about this. Is this
Yeah.
the view of metamodernism? What is the view of metamodernism about science? Is this also a conciliation between the two?
Yeah. So the place to start with that is my articles on integral and metamodernism refer to this book, 2015 book called Meta Theory for the 21st Century or something like that. And it's the whole point of the book. It's an edited volume, but you can kind of distill it to this chart that I put in the article. And the chart shows it juxtaposes integral theory, critical realism, and complex thought. And so what that volume shows is that a lot of people have thought about this and identified those kind of three schools of thought as, relating to each other and pretty prominent in different ways, but maybe mixing some elements of each other. And so they attempted a synthesis, right? And so, my background didn't really go through any of those theoretical channels anyways. But I recognize them as kind of, I guess, staples of what we're trying to do. And so just the fact that the book is called Meta Theory and it's making these meta theoretical moves, I put it in the broad category of metamodernism. And of course, a lot of people in that book are participating in conversations online about this, and we're trying to converge and work together. And a lot of people embrace critical realism to cut to the chase of it. So but then when it comes to okay, well, how do we teach that to everybody? How do we communicate it? Right. This is just one kind of point of the many points that make up the constellation of metamodernism. So we're still trying to figure it out, but definitely I fill the gaps in my own naivete with those types of assumptions.
Okay.
Right. So you have something solid to fall back on. But at the end of the day, a lot of the theorizing can get very far away from both diagnosing problems correctly and the solutions to them. So we're constantly faced with kind of we're in a labyrinth, so to speak, and we're constantly faced with dead ends.
Well, it seems there is a lot of room to use a metamodernist view on science itself, on these problems. I mean, evidence-based, right? We could just be epistemically modest, to use the critical realist term, epistemically modest about what we see, which is in and of itself some of a social constructionist assertion, but on the other hand, we could also at the same time assert that there is an objective reality. Again, being modest about what we see about that reality, which might be flawed, objective reality is there. So that's a way in and of itself to conciliate both modernism and postmodernism.
I want to bring in something kind of out of left field. Well, it's not really from left field. It's from outer space, but UFOs, right? So
Yeah.
I bring it up because some of the people in this meta theory volume, like Sean Esborn Hargens, it pursues, the study of UFOs with a lot of interest and vigor, like he does his meta theory type of stuff. And I don't think there's a there. So I think that kind of undermines some of the broader work. But I bring it up because it is this like open question. We can't
Mhm.
verify it. And the
Mhm.
way it relates to futures in some obvious and non-obvious
Oh
ways.
yeah.
But another scholar who believes and pursues this is Alexander Wendt, and I've been inspired by his work for a long time. And one of my favorite theories from him is that a world state is inevitable, and that's interesting because it's very future oriented, right? And he's predicting it pretty far off, like 50 to 100 years, right? So pretty broad kind of guidelines for that, but he's saying it's inevitable, right? And this is like a real attractive hook in any kind of kind of theory or prophecy or prophetic work. And that attracted me, especially because the paper has integrity, and he's saying it's not inevitable in a particular kind of way. There's many ways to get there, right? That's key, because
Oh, that's interesting.
otherwise it scares people off, right? And I do believe it's inevitable, and there's ways to get there, right? You can follow his logic. He makes an interesting kind of self-organization and historical argument that state boundaries are always changing, right? So why would it be any different going into the future? The kind of Westphalian kind of consensus that we have, like, yeah, it's not as permanent as we think it is. Young people like us have a very short historical memory. We haven't seen a lot of our countries change, but they are changing. And, corporations are out competing states in many cases, right? So we're in a new world order, for better or worse. And so, and he's an international relations specialist. So he's got some authority to make these kinds of strong theories. So that, and I took it with a grain of salt, because there was a counter argument that's to it that kind of fused teleonomy with teleology. So the teleology path is more like specific and more conditional, and the teleonomy path is more open ended. And so it's just worthwhile to get into kind of the details of the debate sometimes. But at any rate, that gave me enough of a one point of many in terms of my long-term thinking, that like, okay, if this is true, if it's true, then it does, shift a lot of political research priorities, and we can start to embrace it, right? Because we've got bigger problems to solve, like climate change. So so I bring, yeah, to get back to UFOs, right? Both of these people also speculate and theorize a little bit, like, well, frankly, outside the boundaries of science, into a lot of hypothetical stuff, wishful thinking in some cases. And don't get me wrong, I wish it were true as much as the next person, but there's something about the arc I went over that, like, I was interested for a long time, but unlike them, it didn't sustain my interest, because I've seen enough debunks and stuff now to believe that there's nothing there, and that actually that kind of inquiry disrupts our political um, our political jurisprudence, or our
Certitude, yeah.
political, yeah, our chops, our sensibility, it really, and just in terms of um public policy and stuff, it derails serious arguments. So for myself, like, I've noticed this UFO stuff come up very prominently in the last few months, almost at exactly the time that the Israel Palestine conflict has flared up, and the Israel occupation of Palestine. And so I'm not drawing a hard connection there, but they're coming up at the same time, and one derails the other, right? Everyone's talking about UFOs, and so where is the space to, have the conversation about the Israel occupation, which that conversation is always happening, by the way. It's so easy to just look it up and find those people, but that's not happening so much in the metamodern spaces, right? So there is still a lot of contention and divergence in these regards, and yeah, I think we need to figure it out, though.
Well, that brings up an important issue, which is how do you make it clear to a larger audience that we have these competing viewpoints, oftentimes opposed to each other. So these might just be observations of a latent phenomenon that we don't know yet. Science is not there yet, right? But this seems to be extremely reasonable, extremely easy to get across, right? It just, the reality is there. We don't know it yet. We need to approach it from a triangulated perspective from several viewpoints in order to get at it. But yet, if you think about the current media debate, right, once an ideology about something is ossified, it really stays there for a long time, which is, and it's a very empiricist point of view. It's like what we have seen before is there, and that's going to be that for a long time. So there is, it speaks, what you say speaks of the difficulty of, and possibly the challenges of, getting across a meta theory like metamodernism that is in and of itself trying to bring together different strengths, different opinions in order to get at a common ground.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, I guess, like, there's a risk here of,
Okay.
are we going into a kind of hyper pluralism where those disagreements can be reconciled, or
Right.
are we pursuing what I call, consensus building, and what others call consilience? Like, so that's still an open question. Like this Perspectiva book, which is out now, and I'm in it, and you've read a bit about it. It's very much like that, very pluralist. Like, here's a bunch of different views, and so, maybe that's what it has to be. That's what that has to be. But I've been contentious with that for years, right? Saying that we should be more actively building consensus, because, like, it took 3 years to make that book, right? Imagine what would have happened if you just got those 12 people into a Zoom call to, hash out 5 or 6 kind of like meta points, or, kind of baseline convictions about the theory and about the world. Like, you know, so I always believe that that potential is there, but old habits die hard, right? So a lot of books that get published follow the same pattern, and it's
Yep.
kind of like, well, so what? So there's this slippery slope with pluralism that, are we just mashing up a lot of people's dumb ideas, or are we trying to educate everybody, and or are we trying to smooth out kind of conflicts? Like, we have to do it all.
Yes.
And just theorizing about it and writing articles hasn't fulfilled that criteria, in my view.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And let me qualify what I said before in order not to be misunderstood. If we have a pluralism of perspective that do not come together, is almost like defeating the whole point. I've read, like you, several books about maybe a topic, and every chapter is written by a different author, and they clash with each other. And at the end of the read, you're just more confused than before. So I am in for a dialectical perspective. So bringing those people together in a Zoom call and let them talk until they understand each other probably wouldn't work better, than letting them write a very informed chapter alone, right? Separately from each other.
Yeah, and so I've been through this type of experience a couple times now. One in this metamodernity book, and also in this thing called The Side View.
Oh yeah, I read an article you wrote on that. Yeah, it was very well researched. Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, and there's a lot of good articles in that volume, and the one that I was just thinking of is about atomism, kind of, and like not in the sense of atoms, but in the like atomization of individuals, right? And so that paper really spoke to my feeling both what's good about it and what's very bad and unhealthy about it. And just speaking to your point there, like the writing process was very atomistic. I did it entirely by
Mm.
myself. And there's a stage where the editor gives everybody feedback and ties it all together. But yeah, I think you put it well. Yeah. So that's where we're at, and I want to see just
Absolutely.
more kind of solidarity and synthesis between our authors without groupthink. Right? When I write about consensus, I stress that it's the opposite of groupthink. So you're all going through a kind of change together to understand something new and something important.
Well, that's why podcasts and dialogues like this are, to me, of extreme value, because I've done a few of these, and I've also done a few of those, commentaries, academic commentaries, where you just reply to each other. And I just realized that oftentimes there are language problems, like simple semantics, that people are talking past each other. Maybe they have an understanding that is extremely overlapping, but they put it in a way that the other person doesn't get it. So if you put it in a written form, it takes years to conciliate, literally. But if we talk like we're doing now, it's very easy to pick up, because I just ask you, hey, but what do you mean by that? And then we sort it out. So
Mm.
so absolutely, if this is the metamodern way to do it, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
Are you ready for a lighthearted closing question?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I have watched a movie you have produced and acted in that is absolutely brilliant, and that is the movie that you have produced for in publicity of the Abstract Organization, which is the think tank that you are running. So this project, in and of itself, for me, opens up like a number of questions. Probably like another interview should be just focused on that. But I'm interested because you have produced this movie, and it somehow it promotes your view of abstraction as an instrument of pedagogy, so to speak, and consulting, which is unheard of. And at the same time, which this is the interesting part, it's a satire about the very idea of consulting, because it's a intelligent hodgepodge mashup of critique of consulting, which is very clear from the movie. It can just fall into fried air, with a lot of references to science fiction and popular culture. So it's just brilliant. We're gonna have a link to that in the description below for sure. But before the audience have a chance to take a look at it, what was the driving force behind that project? What is the meaning of that satire slash publicity? What is the objective you were trying to achieve? And as a consequence, what is really the core tenets that you are trying to promote as the founder of a consulting organization?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for setting it up like that. I'm very honored by anybody who kind of takes the time to watch it and think about it and talk about it, because admittedly, like, not everybody gets it, right? So I've accepted at this point that, like, it's got some qualities that are like a student film. I did the best
That's
I
okay.
could with
Yeah.
limited means, right? But the film itself was an experiment, right? And everything that I can say about it also is, like, supplement, because I tried to make the film so that it has everything it needs to tell you what it needs to tell you, right? So it's a short film. I wish it was longer in some ways, but I kind of ran out of writing, to be honest. That's why it ends to be continued. It's a very complicated, silly story, but I tried to, yeah, just to kind of give a quick overview. Like, I tried to make a story out of a mock infomercial and a mock kind of consulting thing, right? And so the story is, well, what if there was these people that had a kind of fitness company, but they did it in order to convert people on how stupid the commodification of fitness is, right? So because Michael Shermer years ago wrote something called SHAM. It's an acronym for the self-help and actualization movement. And the central thesis from that was that, well, all of these self-help books actually just make people dependent on self-help books, right? And so fitness, has similar things. It's a multi-billion dollar industry, kind of fit people and sexes everywhere in pop culture. And meanwhile you have like obesity epidemics and heart disease being the number one killer. And so like just this insane juxtaposition of the hyper capitalist culture and the totally like anti-social world we live in, right? Literally kills people and like monetizes their dreams and ambitions for just basic health. So that's the kind of like insight and anger that I had that motivated the project. Like I said, there's a lot in it that I have trouble explaining because it's written as sort of a piece of media that you consume in an interactive way and maybe watch it twice and think about, right? But when I finished it, I couldn't produce any more of the film part of it. It took me I spent a year just sort of promoting it, right, to try to get it out there. So just in terms of logistics, I couldn't. But also I was turning my attention back to research and writing because the project, as you say, it's kind of promotional. And I wanted people to recognize that in the film, it's promoting this book. It's all about this book, The Abstract. They're all reading The Abstract. And it's like, the joke is not just that like they get into this fitness program, but that the MacGuffin, so to speak, the object that the characters pursue is just a book, but a book that is calling itself really special. And so, I had to get to work kind of writing that book. And so that's what my blog has sort of turned out to be. There's a dozen articles about abstraction in different ways, artificial intelligence and metaphysics and art and race even, so different fields that this concept goes through. And I'm still sort of trying to figure out, well, how could I put a book together? What chapters do I still have to write? Because there's enough content there for a couple books, but it's not a conclusive, self-contained product yet. And that's what I'd want it to be if it's a metamodern book, truly. But certainly, there's just so much, like the concept of a monograph or of bibliotherapy or of just pursuing philosophy in general, right? Does, lead one to be wanting to produce a great work, a kind of what do they call it? Ars magna, Magnus Opum is a great work. Sorry, Ars Magna is something else, but yeah. And so, but the movie didn't work as a promotional vehicle. Like nobody was like, hey, so where can I buy this book? It was like they just got the superficial jokes about abs and abstracting. And so, and that speaks to the market, the very small market for metamodern kind of text too, because a lot of theorists point to pop culture shows like Community or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or various art house projects or, as having metamodern quality. So I'm definitely aspiring to that, both in terms of like film, where film is going, and being experimental in that regard, but also referring to some other thing, to a book in reality.
It would be fun if you eventually ended up actually writing the abstract book, maybe just pulling together some of those articles you have already written around, which actually to me is enough material if it's binded together, right? If it certainly is enough material to write a book, and then still use this as a promotional vehicle. Because maybe now it's not clear because maybe you're not there yet, as your work is not there yet. But in the future, I think once you have a book that is clearly well researched and rigorous enough, and then you have a promotional like that, maybe it could be just a trailer, a short version of the movie, which clearly is a satire to other books, then it would make it clear that the book you're selling is trying to be above and beyond the typical best business book of the year, something like that. But that to me would be fun and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, well, there is a trailer already, but yeah, I've got to make a book available, because then I can start doing that kind of promotional strategy. It's and I do want to continue with film stuff, but logistically it's just not in the cards right now, so I hope people like can just, if they're interested, like take in the project for what it is. There's a 36-minute film. There's some additional kind of add-ons that are on my YouTube channel. And on my main YouTube channel, actually, the film is broken up into little webisodes. So it's people could watch it that way, but on a different channel, you could just watch the whole thing. But then, yeah, juxtaposed with the content and the kind of business plan, and like it's a much bigger project than just me that I'm pointing to. And I hope like a lot of it's up to me, but I want, I've met so many interesting people over the years through this project that we've had these types of conversations, and I'd love to try to consolidate that network and that work and activity, and continue the project. Right. So as you see in the film, there's a couple people that they're actually playing themselves. Right. So their name is their actual name, and they're speaking in some official capacity about something smart. And so it's a fusion. The whole project is like metafiction. There's some truthful elements and some purely fictional elements, and it's kind of blended together. And so I'd like to continue to do that while making it like crystal clear to people what's what, right? So that the satire part of it opens up other people's other intellectual faculties, and vice versa, right? That they can experience this metamorphosis, if you will. And like the film ends with kind of the main character experiencing a kind of metanoia, a change of mind, where he moves into his higher faculties and has a kind of soliloquy, a kind of poetic jam at the end of it, right? And so that's what I'm trying to like market and sell to people, but also give away for free, right? I want to empower the world.
Yeah, I think it's totally fine if it's viewed as an experimental thing. I mean, I have judged it as an art form, so it literally as a vehicle to expand my awareness on some things. I completely didn't judge it as a promotional vehicle, of course.
Right.
But then it's interesting to see that in a subtle manner it promotes a certain critique of certain ideologies. So that is in and of itself art. So it's fascinating. If that comes out again in your future work, good. If not, this is in and of itself super interesting. But what is let's just go back on the, let's more say more tangible component of this project. What is the non-satire, non-promotional, but still consulting principle that the Abs-Tract Organization is actually trying to do? Because this is similar to a lot of what Futures and 4Sight people are doing, which is consulting with actual clients, trying to help them navigate the complex world we live in. So what is that? What is the view of that according to the Abs-Tract Organization?
Yeah, so more through the lens of a think tank.
Yeah.
The purpose is to, but in line with the film, the purpose is to do something kind of mystical, bridge high and low, high and low theory and sort of states of being and people, such that closing the wealth gap, but just with respect to the film and the punchlines. Like, I wanted to make critical thinking cool, right? Because you really don't find it very much out in the world, out in the professional world, because criticism is not cool. In fact, it's like it's I think it's cool, but it's it's not generally thought of as cool. And so, yeah, and bridging what I call epistemic gaps or knowledge gaps, right? So, think tanks themselves. I start my anti-intellectualism article with a kind of prologue about think tanks, and so when I started the project, there was like 6,000 think tanks in the world. Now there's like 9,000. Like, there's already too many, and a lot of them, in like the Heritage Foundation, it's one of the biggest, most successful think tanks in the world. It's pure propaganda for right wing projects, and so it's incredibly dangerous that it has any type of legitimacy. And so I just it's obvious to me that a lot of think tanks are in echo chambers. They're married to market liberalism or whatever it may be, and that they need mediation. That space needs to be disrupted, and maybe it can be outcompeted. I'm interested in consulting, whatever form that takes. I think that can mean so many different things, but largely it invariably means like there's a client and a kind of a professional on the other end offering some sort of service. But I think a lot of corporations and states and organizations need consulting that they don't even realize they need it. They need to learn how to integrate criticism and transform, right? And so this applies to media, to universities, to everything and everybody.
Well, I do see that, and I do hope that there might be a space for futures and 4Sight practitioners to incorporate metamodernism as an object of consulting, because it could be, it's just the idea that it can be, you can criticize certain ideologies and conciliate them with the critic. So that is in and of itself an object of consulting. And so I do hope that this can be like food for thought for both of us, maybe in the future, but also for other people listening or viewing this interview, to incorporate somehow metamodern thinking into their practical work. And I think maybe that is a good way to end it.
Yeah, sounds good. I hope people begin that journey, because if nothing else, it's a big reading list that will make you scratch your head and think about things differently.
Where can people find you?
On Twitter, I use Tato_tweets. The website is abs-tract, like TRACT.org. And yeah, I'm easy to find. There is a kind of Facebook group. It's not really active. I don't have a Discord, but I'm easy to get a hold of by email or Twitter. And yeah, definitely want to kind of grow the network and the movement and keep having these conversations.
Cool. And I'll try my best to link all the references which we have mentioned in the description box below, including the film, of course. And that being said, Brent, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. There is so much about this that I want to explore more. So maybe once I have read on it, we should catch up again.
Likewise, and me with your work. I think there's a lot of meat there, for lack of a better word. And yeah, I look forward to more.
Take care. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.